Hey guys, welcome to my first ever face and voice video. This is new for me and I'm a bit shaky, so if you could bear with me, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Because I know how hard this is to watch.
Now you've probably read the title, but today I'm going to be going over my personal process of how I make a speed paint. I'll be going over my tablet, programs, art style, tips, and editing. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start by showing off my beautiful drawing tablet.
I'm not sponsored.
This tablet is small and compact and has managed to survive my brutal pressure habits with only a few scratches that don't change performance. The pen comes with 10 replacement nibs and an applicator. I went a whole year before I changed the nibs for the first time, so it got worn down pretty good. The pen is battery free and has 2 buttons on it. There is a 1 centimeter hover space where you can move the cursor without actually drawing. I find that I'm never more than a few millimeters away from the surface. The driver is very easy to install and will display as an application that can be used to edit pen settings and test pressure sensitivity. On that note, the pressure sensitivity is beautiful, with 8,192 levels of pressure sensitivity. It's my first drawing tablet and great for beginners. I got it on Amazon for only about $30 Canadian, so I'm quite impressed with it. As for programs, I have 3 that I use. For drawing, I use Fire Alpaca. It's a free-to-download application with many functions that are very easy to use. For recording, I use OBS, or Open Broadcast Studio. It is also free and relatively easy to use, but I'd recommend going through all the settings first. I like to have it set to high-quality medium file size MP4. For editing, I use Wondershare Filmora 9. Now this one was not free. It was a single fee of about $80 Canadian. Although you can use it for free, it'll have a watermark and fewer features. Now onto the drawing process. I've made a habit of always doing a couple seconds of test recording just to make sure it's working after a few incidents where I messed up a setting and it didn't work. Once I see that it's working, I delete the test footage, open Fire Alpaca, click record, and start going. I find the use of shapes to be very helpful. If you've watched any of my speed paints, you'll see that I always start with a circle for the head, shoulders, and haunches. This helps with getting the perspective right. I'll then go on to make a cross in the face for perspective and add a circle in the middle for a muzzle. I find ears to be pretty easy, so I just add some rough triangles usually. Then I move on to limbs, ovals for each segment of the limbs. Add a rough noodle for a tail, and you can move on to the rough line art. Add a new layer and lower the opacity of the rough sketch to make the rough line art easier to see. This is where you start to see distinguishable features. Perspective starts to show and you can make more sense of what's going on. It's basically just tracing but with more thought involved. You can also add rough facial features. You could do this on the rough sketch layer as well, but I find it's important to have it on the rough line art layer. Once I'm done, I delete the contents of the sketch layer, fill the opacity, and put it on top of the rough line art layer. This isn't necessary, but I do it so I'm not overcrowded with extra unused layers. Now the line art is arguably the hardest part. I like to have clean, smooth lines, so I usually end up doing them more than once. This is where undo comes in handy. It could be among the best things about digital art. I use it so often I don't even really notice anymore. Going off on a tangent, I once tried to undo a mistake I made on paper with a pencil. Once the line art is done, I can start coloring and go through the same process with the rough line art layer as I did with the sketch layer. Fill opacity and clear all contents, but this time I leave it below the line art. Now yes, the paint bucket is great, but it's flawed. It leaves gaps and can mess up the line art. So I do it the harder but more efficient way. I select everything around the character I'm going to be coloring, then invert the selection. I then add the base color throughout the area. I like to add a new layer for details so that if I ever need to deselect, I have a solid layer to go back and grab. The coloring process only needs to be as complicated as the character's design. Repeat those steps for each character in the piece. For simplicity's sake, it's good to folder each major aspect of the piece. Have one for background, one for foreground if there is one, and one for each character. Layers and folders are gifts from above. Use them. Now for shading. This is huge for bringing life, shape, and depth to a piece. Without any kind of shading, it'll usually look flat and cartoonish, which can be done very well and be beautiful, but I like to make things hard for myself for some reason. This is where the beauty of hue adjust comes in. I like to start the shading process with a bright, obnoxious color to make it more obvious where it's going. Once I'm done, I open up the filters panel and choose hue. Here I can adjust the color of the shading, saturation, and brightness. Once I've found a desirable tint, I can play with the opacity. Sometimes I like to add another smaller layer of shading in more distinguished areas to add to the depth. Shading and lighting is a crucial part of most pieces and often changes the whole vibe for better or for worse. Location and time can also affect how you want to shade. Then you can add a background and voila, a masterpiece. Now I'll go stop recording and head back to Fire Alpaca to save. I recommend saving a version with layers just in case. Always better safe than sorry. Now that we have our video, it's time to start editing. I usually start by going to YouTube and looking for a free soundtrack that fits the vibe of the piece. Once I find one that I like, I download it as an MP3 file, move it to my music folder, and import it into my project. I'll then proceed to import my video, finished image, intro card, which is a more recent addition, and outro animation. I'll start by adding the music to stage. Then I'll add the Speedpaint footage. I'll cut off both ends of the footage so you don't have to see me starting and stopping the recording. Then it's off to speed it up. I'll usually speed it up more than I need to initially. I like the video to end about 25 seconds before the end of the soundtrack. This is because my end card is 20 seconds long and I find 5 seconds to be a good length for the finished product. Once all the aspects are imported, I can adjust the speed of the video so everything is connected. I like to crop the video to only show the workspace because the stuff on the outside can be distracting and it looks cleaner with just the art. Then I add transitions and render a preview just to make sure. Once I'm satisfied, I can export it and schedule its premiere on YouTube. And that's how I do it. A fully prepared Speedpaint ready to see the world. This is going to be awful to edit after this, but oh well, say levy. I want to thank you all so much for watching and applaud you for making it this far. I know my voice isn't exactly pleasant to the ear, but I hope you managed to take something away from this, even if it's just along the lines of how not to film a YouTube video. Bye!